Chapter 4 Captured by Cannibals. During our stay in Jarma, Kronos and I were guests in a fine building set apart for the use of visiting scientists. I was amazed at the sybaritic luxury developed by this people, a luxury which, though illimitably and unimaginably resourceful, was at no time in excess of the bounds of good taste. There were baths that would have been the envy of a Roman emperor, and beds that would have reduced Cleopatra to beggary. We were lulled by rich aerial music from no visible source, and were served with food and with all other necessities, as if by intangible hands, at the mere verbal expression of a wish. Of course, there was a mechanical secret to such wonders, but the secret was cleverly hidden, and the means never obtruded itself. Humbly, I realized how far ahead of ourselves were these men of 15,000 A.D., with their quiet and consummate mastery of natural laws, a mastery which none of them seemed to regard as being of any great value or importance. I was somewhat embarrassed by the honor paid to myself as the originator of a means of retarding the black rot, and could only feel that my inspiration had been merely a fortunate accident. Compliments, both written and verbal, were showered upon me by scientific dignitaries, and it was only through the intercession of Kronos, who explained my aversion to publicity, that I was able to avoid numerous invitations. Finding that he had certain business to transact, Kronos was not ready to return to his estate for several days. Since he could not devote all of his time to me, I formed the habit of going for long walks on the streets of Jarma and through its environs. Walking slowly amid the changing scenes of a metropolis has always been a source of unending fascination for me, and of course in this unfamiliar city of the future, where all was new and different, the lure of such wanderings was more than doubled, and the sensations of knowing that I trod above the ruins of New York, separated from my own period by 13,000 years, with their inconceivable historic and telluric vicissitudes, was about the weirdest feeling that I had ever experienced. It was a strange spectacle through which I sauntered. Vehicles were used, of a light, noiseless, gliding type, without visible means of propulsion, and there were many air vessels which flew deftly and silently overhead and discharged their passengers on the roofs or balconies of the higher buildings. And the landing or departure of great shining ether ships was an hourly occurrence. However, it was the throng of foot passengers which engaged my attention most. Both sexes and all ages were attired in gaily colored costumes. I was impressed by the practical absence of noise, tumult, and hurry. All was orderly, tranquil, unconfused. From the scarcity of women in the crowd, I realized how true were the racial fears expressed by Kronos. The women whom I saw were seldom beautiful or attractive, according to 20th century standards. In fact, there was something almost lifeless and mechanical about them. It was as if the sex had long reached the limit of its evolutionary development, and was now in a stage of stagnation or virtual retrogression. Such, I learned from Kronos, was indeed the case. But these women, because of their rarity and their value to the race, were shielded and protected with great care. Polyandry was prevalent, and romantic love, or even strong passion, were unknown things in this latter-day world. A horrible homesickness came over me at times as I roamed amid this alien throng and peered into shop windows where outlandish foodstuffs and curiously wrought fabrics from foreign planets were often displayed, and the feeling would increase whenever I approached the Martian quarter, where dwelt a considerable colony of these mysterious outsiders. Some of them had transported their own many-angled and asymmetrical architecture to Earth. Their houses defied the rules of geometry, one might almost say those of gravity, and the streets about them were full of exotic odors, among which the stupefying reek of the drug Nulton was predominant. The place allured me, even though it disturbed me, and I strolled often through the tortuous alleys, beyond which I would reach the open country and wander among luxuriant fields and palmy woods that were no less baffling and unfamiliar than the scenes of the city. One afternoon I started out later than usual. As I passed through the city, I noticed that there were few Venusians in the throng, and overheard rumors of fresh revolts. However, I paid little attention to these at the time. Twilight had overtaken me when I turned back from the open country toward the Martian quarter. The sylvan wilderness, in which I had never met many people, was quieter even than usual. I was following a narrow path bordered with thick shrubbery and palmettos, and I began to hurry with a vague apprehensiveness, remembering the rumors I had heard before. Heretofore I had been unafraid, but now, in the thickening twilight, I was aware of some indefinable menace, and remembered that I had foolishly forgotten to arm myself with the electronic projector which Kronos had given me to carry in my wanderings. I had not seen anyone in the neighborhood, but now, as I went along, I scrutinized the deepening shadows of the shrubbery on each side of the path. Suddenly I heard a sound behind me that was like the scuffling of heavy, naked feet, and turning, saw that 7 or 8 Venusians, several of them armed with clubs, were closing in upon me. They must have been crouching amid the leafage as I passed. Their eyes gleamed like those of ravenous wolves in the twilight, and they uttered low, snarling animal noises as they hurled themselves upon me. I avoided the viciously swinging weapon of the foremost, and laid him out with a neat uppercut. But the others were at me in a moment, using indiscriminately their clubs and dirty talons. I was aware of claws that tore my clothing and slashed my flesh, and then something descended upon my head with a dull crash, and I went down through reeling flame and whirling darkness to utter insensibility. When I came to myself, I was conscious at first only of my pain-racked head and limbs. The crown of my head was throbbing violently from the blow I had received. Then I heard a mutter of thick, unhuman voices, and, opening my eyes, beheld the flame-lit faces and bodies of a score of Venusians who were dancing around a great fire. I was lying on my back, and it required only a tentative effort at movement to tell me that my hands and feet were bound. Another man, similarly bound, and perhaps dead or dying, was stretched on the ground beside me. I lay still, deeming it inadvisable to let the Venusians know that I had recovered consciousness, and watched the lurid scene. It was something out of Dante's Inferno, with the red inflection that ran bloodily on the uncouth, hairy limbs and hideous demoniacal features of the interplanetary slaves. Their movements, though they had a semblance of some rude, horrible rhythm, were nearer to the capering of animals than they were to the dancing of even the lowest terrestrial savages, and I could not help but wonder that such beings had mastered the art of lighting a fire. The use of fire, I was told, had been unknown to them in their own world till the advent of men. I remembered hearing also that they sometimes employed it nowadays in their cannibalistic revels, having acquired a taste for cooked meat. Likewise, it was rumored of late that they were not averse to human flesh, and that more than one unfortunate had fallen a victim to their practices. Such reflections were not conducive to my peace of mind. Also, I was oddly disturbed by a large sheet of metal grating lying near the fire, and having a grotesque resemblance to a giant gridiron, which was visible at intervals between the whirling figures. At a second glance, I recognized it as a sort of perforated tray which was used in the dehydration of various fruits. It was about 8 feet in length by 4 feet in width. Suddenly I heard a whisper from the man beside me, whom I had supposed unconscious. "They are waiting for the fire to die down," he said almost inaudibly. "Then they will broil us alive over the coals on that sheet of metal." I shuddered, though the information was far from novel or unexpected. "How did they get you?" I inquired in a tone as low as that of my interlocutor. "I am, or was, the owner of these slaves," he answered. "They caught me unaware this time, but I believe, or hope, that my family has escaped. I made the mistake of thinking the slaves were thoroughly cowed from punishments that I inflicted not long ago. I gather that there has been a concerted revolt this afternoon, from what the savages themselves, whose speech I understand, have let drop. They are not so unintelligent as most people believe them to be, and I have a theory that the Terran climate has served to stimulate their mentality. They possess secret means of communication among themselves over the most unbelievable distances that are no less efficient than radio. I have long suspected, too, that they have a tacit understanding with the Martians who are covertly abetting them. The microorganism that caused the black rot was no doubt smuggled from Venus by the Martians in their ether vessels, and there is no telling what sort of plague they will loose next. There are some queer and frightful things on those alien planets, things that are deadly to terrestrials, though harmless enough to the natives. I fear that the end of human supremacy is near at hand." We conversed in this fashion for some time, and I learned that the name of my fellow captive was Jos Talar. In spite of our dire and seemingly hopeless predicament, he showed no evidence of fear, and the abstract philosophical manner in which he viewed and discussed the situation was truly remarkable. But this, as I had occasion to observe, was characteristic of the temper of mankind in that era. A full half-hour must have passed as we lay there bound and helpless. Then we saw that the huge fire was beginning to die down, revealing a vast bed of glowing coals. The light grew dimmer on the antic figures around it, and the beast-like faces of the Venusians were more loathsome than ever in the lowering gloom. The dancing ceased, as if at an unspoken signal, and several of the dancers left the circle and came to where Jos Talar and myself were lying. We could see the gloating of their obscene eyes and the slavering of their greedy mouths as they dug their filthy talons into our flesh and dragged us roughly toward the fire. In the meanwhile, others had stretched the huge metal tray upon the bed of coals. All of them stood eyeing us with a hyena-like avidity that made me shiver with sickness and repulsion. I will not pretend that I was able to regard with any degree of complacency the prospect of becoming in the near future a Venusian piece de resistance, but I nerved myself to the inevitable, reflecting that the agony would soon be over. Even if they did not knock us on the head beforehand, there would be a swift though terrible death on the bed of coals. Our captors had now seized us by our feet and shoulders, as if they were about to fling us upon the improvised gridiron. There was an awful moment of suspense, and I wondered why the Venusians did not complete the expected action. Then I heard from their lips a low snarling, with an unmistakable note of alarm, and saw that all of them were watching the starlit heavens. They must have possessed keener senses than those of humanity, for at first I could neither see nor hear anything to justify their attention. Then, far off among the stars, I perceived a moving light, such as was carried by the Acamarian air vessels. At first I did not connect the light with any idea of possible rescue, and I wondered at the perturbation of the slaves. Then I realized that the light was flying very low, and was descending straight toward the fire. It drew near with meteoric rapidity, till Jos Talar and myself, and the cowering savages, were illumined by the full beams of the bluish searchlight. The vessel itself, like all of its kind, was almost noiseless, and it slid to earth and landed with preternatural speed and dexterity within 20 paces of the fire. Several men emerged from its dim bulk and ran toward us. The slaves had loosened their hold on Jos Talar and myself, and growling ferociously, they crouched as if ready to leap upon the advancing figures. The men were all armed with tubular objects, which I supposed were the usual electronic projectors. They leveled them at the Venusians, and thin rays of flame, like those from acetylene torches, issued from them and stabbed across the gloom. Several of the savages screamed with agony and fell writhing to the ground. One of them dropped among the coals and howled for a few instants like a demon who had been taken in some pitfall prepared for the damned. The others began to run, but were followed by long slender beams that searched them out in their flight, dropping several more. Soon the survivors had disappeared from view in the darkness, and the fallen had ceased to writhe. As our rescuers approached, and the glow of the dying fire illumined their faces, I saw that the foremost was Kronos Alcon. Some of the others I recognized as scientists whom I had met in Jarma. Kronos Alcon knelt beside me and severed my bonds with a sharp knife, while someone else performed a like service for Jos Talar. "Are you hurt?" asked Kronos. "Not severely," I replied, "but you certainly came just in the proverbial nick of time. A moment more, and they would have thrown us upon the fire. Your coming is a miracle. I cannot imagine how it happened." "That is easily explained," said Kronos as he helped me to my feet. "When you did not return this evening, I became alarmed, and knowing the usual directions of your wanderings, I studied this part of the environs of Jarma very closely with a nocturnal televisor which renders plainly visible the details of the darkest landscape. I soon located the Venusians and their fire, and recognized one of the bound figures as being yourself. After that, it required only a few minutes for me to collect several companions, arm them, charter an air vessel, and seek the spot indicated by the televisor. I am more than thankful that we arrived in time. There has been," he went on, "a worldwide revolt of the slaves during the past few hours. 2 of the continents, Asia and Australia, are already in their hands, and a desperate struggle is going on throughout Akamaria. We are no longer using the electronic projectors, which merely stun. The weapons we use tonight are heat-ray generators, which kill. But come, we must return to Jarma. I will tell you more afterwards."